Hello everybody, welcome to another video, and today is the 1st of April, and I want to start off by apologizing first of all for the lack of uploads because I haven't really uploaded this week and I've been very inconsistent over the past month or so. That's really been out of my control. I really like making these videos, and so I'm going to try to do my best to just upload more frequently, and I think I'll be able to in the coming weeks. Now that I've been able to get a lot of the pressure off my back, I'm going to be able to focus more on the channel. And so let's just begin by talking about Bakhmut and some of the recent developments around here. And I want to talk about how the tactics around the city have changed in recent weeks. And I want to begin, first of all, by talking about the southern flank, and I'm going to connect that to the wider situation and what's going on within the city center itself. Let's begin with the fact that the Ukrainians have actually been able to regain a little bit of territory to the south of Ivanivske. This is not the first time I've been reporting this. A few days ago in one of my last videos, I reported that Ukrainians were able to take over one of these fields that is just to the south of Ivanivske. And now they've been able to further expand their control south of Ivanivske by taking over this key trench line over here. You could see that I'm going over it in red, and basically pushing the Russians back to this line over here. So I'm pretty sure there's a trench line over here because usually the trench lines are adjacent to some sort of open road or path that would be next to the actual fields. The fields would be the gray zone. So this is what we would consider the gray zone, this squiggly area. And so now the Ukrainians have been able to conduct local counterattacks. And the Russians, they've shifted a lot of their capabilities away from Ivanivske, and some of their sources even admit that they've been pushed back a good 100 meters in this specific area. So this will relieve pressure from the Ukrainians that are using the T0504 road, this one over here, to supply Ivanivske first of all, but also Bakhmut more importantly. And so it just improves the supply situation just by a little and gives them a bit of breathing space as most of the fighting rages on in a different part of the front line. And so this comes after numerous Wagner assaults from maybe about a month ago in the direction of Ivanivske that really failed. Here we have one video of this here. It was posted about 8 days ago, but still is important because you could in essence see how the Wagner group tries to advance and how the Ukrainians are using their limited capabilities in this area to push them back. And so the video from a week ago, it's released from the Azov Kharkiv Special Operations Force, so we know they're now operating in this region as well. And it shows that the Ukrainian UAV crews that are using both reconnaissance and loitering drones, maybe they were switchblades, I'm not exactly sure, and they were using them to spot the advancing Wagner dismounted infantry. And so they had no sort of infantry fighting vehicle or tank support or anything like that. There were basically 3 assault groups in this direction. And once they were spotted by the drones, those drones obviously contacted the Ukrainian artillery crews that were a bit further back from the front line, and also the mortar crews. And so they were able to utilize this artillery and mortars just to disperse the group. I think only 6 people were killed out of the 30, and they also said 12 wounded, the Ukrainian sources. Now, the point is not necessarily the amount of people that are dead, but the fact that it's able to disperse the assaults before they're able to really gain any steam and push forward into a place like Ivanivske. So you have all these Russian forces gathering around, for instance, an open field, and they're trying to advance. They have no concealment, and then they get spotted, and they're forced to disperse. And where do they disperse to? Either to these tree lines over here or to the forest itself. And once they're in there, they can't really advance as much, and they are forced to individually withdraw back to their respective trench lines, for instance. And let me just remind you guys, the trench lines here aren't manned by that many people. There are obviously people in the trenches, but the groups that are manning them and then assaulting and overrunning the opponent's trench lines, they're really doing it in very small groups, both the Russians and Ukrainians in this regard, maybe platoons or squads or even less in some instances. But again, because Ukraine does still have some mortar, UAV, and artillery capabilities, and also they have a wide array of ATGMs that were given by America and NATO, it is very, very difficult for the Wagner group to conduct any sort of assault, large assaults, either using just dismounted infantry or in conjunction with their mechanized vehicles or units, and so they get bogged down very easily. And this video is evidence of this, and the fact that they've not been able to take Ivanivske is further evidence of this, and the fact that they've been pushed back, again, further evidence of this. I've heard a lot of people say that perhaps they're leaving Ivanivske under Ukrainian control on purpose, so they're just sort of waiting in their lines over here and just giving the Ukrainians one route of escape through the T0504 highway or the 506 highway further to the north, and that once the Ukrainians cross through these roads, then that's when they bombard the Ukrainian forces, and that maximizes casualties. Now that can make sense, but it wouldn't explain why the Russians were trying to assault Ivanivske for so long, and also Kromove in that case, and just simply failed. I think they were trying to take it over and either force the Ukrainians out or completely encircle them, but they were unsuccessful in that regard because they were attacking on so many different axes. And so now they've shifted tactics in this area and have really given up on any sort of frontal assault on Ivanivske. It's simply not feasible in the current situation. And I'm going to get into the weather as well and how that's playing a role. But let's first go to the city center where Russia has seen success, and I'm going to give them credit here because this is where it really is due. So the Wagner Group, they've really focused a lot of their efforts here, and not just Wagner but also the Russian forces, on advancing house by house, block by block over the past 2 weeks or so in the areas adjacent to the Bakhmutovka River. And so this has been occurring ever since the two groupings in Bakhmut, the southern grouping and the eastern grouping, were able to link up with one another. This happened when they were able to link up around here just to the north of the Bakhmut Dam, and they were able to work together to then advance further north along this key road that leads to the downtown part of Bakhmut. And so on the way, they were able to storm Ukrainian buildings, but they didn't do this in a rush. There was no hurry. That's why the city hasn't been taken yet. Russia, they are playing the long game in this area. They have the artillery advantage, and so they've been firing extensively on different houses and buildings in Bakhmut, and that has significantly diminished the Ukrainian capabilities. Most of the casualties are from artillery. Most of the damage is from artillery. You can look at the drone footage I've linked over here. It shows how so many residential blocks are simply leveled, but I will say that a lot of the high-rise buildings are still standing, and you don't see that much damage to them because they are so durable and resilient. Now, if we go to Russia's gains in this area, they were able to advance past the Ukrainian line that was centered around Mariupolska Street, so they've been able to take over the houses adjacent to that road. So now you see this sort of mini cauldron forming just to the north of the Sobachivka district in this area, where you have this stadium and all these other facilities. There's a state administration building in this area. You do have some Ukrainian forces holding out for as long as possible. And in this area, you have a lot of the elite Ukrainian units, a lot of the volunteers, and then also some conscripts from territorial defense units, all in this sort of hodgepodge working together to hold the line in smaller squads. And so Wagner Group is clearing them out methodically, one by one. And another interesting thing that I've noticed that I saw posted by the 93rd Mechanized Brigade is that whenever they are forced to withdraw from a certain building, they mine it up and then they remotely demolish it and set up explosions within those buildings whenever the Wagner Group and their forces enter the building. So that's sort of their way of protracting the battles over here. That's been the Ukrainian tactic in this area, trying to protract the battles for as long as possible, allowing Russia to form cauldrons, and then in the last moment withdrawing. Albeit there's been so many casualties, we can't even count them, but I'm going to talk about some units that were complaining about casualties. Either way, it has been effective in at least protracting the battles. Now, if we go on to Russian gains, the Russians were able to advance on the areas adjacent to the Bakhmutovka River. They reached the city center. They took over some key buildings, such as apartment buildings and large facilities that are multiple stories high. And they also raised their flag, and I'm referring to the Wagner Group here. They raised their flag over one of the apartment buildings. And in the drone footage they released, it's first of all snowing, which I'll get to, and second of all, there's no Ukrainian troops in sight anywhere. There's no indication that they're even remotely near the footage. And so that would imply that the Ukrainians are not in any sort of positions that are adjacent to the Bakhmut River anymore. And so although I still show this cube over here as under Ukrainian control, in all likelihood they have begun to withdraw from this area and they have started to regroup in a deeper part of Bakhmut, most likely around this train station. I'm going to circle the area that I'm referring to. I think a lot of the Ukrainian groupings that were able to withdraw from the city center have now been relocated to this area. There's some schools over here, some larger facilities, the rail line obviously, and so it is a good place to set up a defensive position for the time being. But it does also show that the Wagner Group has been able to take over a substantial portion of Bakhmut, about 70%, and they will just continue with the same strategy. Now the issue is they're not going to be able to encircle Bakhmut this way unless they're able to make a mini encirclement that goes through the city itself, which would be like a push from here and then from here. But I don't see how that's possible, because by the time you're done clearing out all the houses, you could have just cleared them out by assaulting it head on directly through the west. And so what this really implies is that what's going to end up happening is that the Russians will squeeze out the Ukrainians, but they won't be encircled in this area. And so you won't have many Ukrainian forces that are surrounded and taken POW. But honestly, that's not the worst scenario for Russia either, because throughout all of these months of fighting, Ukraine has incurred really exorbitant, huge casualties in holding the line. Just as one example, we have the 127th Territorial Defense Brigade, and within that brigade you have the 228th Battalion, just one of many battalions operating in this area. Here's the unit, I've added them in, and in the video you have about maybe 10-15 men that are giving their honest thoughts on the situation, and they've been sent to the front lines. Usually the videos that are released from the men directly, they are more down to earth than the ones that were released from either side's Ministry of Defense. So this is how you get a good picture of what's going on the ground directly from the men that are there. So I want to try to recount what was said in the video they released. So in essence, they complained about a lack of training. They said that they were not provided any sort of sights, any sort of night vision, no sort of logistics were supplied to them. So there's no sort of effective communication between the rear and the front line. There's no real organized system for evacuating the wounded and the dead, and they are threatened a lot by the higher ups if they complain about their situation or refuse to go into battle. So this battalion, specifically the people who recorded in the video, they were saying that they were refusing to fight in the battle, so they were in mutiny. And there's another unit, pretty sure it's from the 111th Territorial Defense Brigade, which I recall was located around Seversk, but it is possible that some of the battalions are also in Bakhmut, so they also released a video where they were complaining about the situation. Very similar complaints, also just talking about the fact that there are just so many casualties incurred. But again, that's natural in this sort of battle and urban nature. Now, about the lack of night vision equipment, that is something that caused Ukraine to lose the Azov district, because the assault on the Azov district happened at night. In the Wagner Group, they did this on purpose. They assaulted it when the Ukrainians would not have the capabilities to effectively fight back. That's why the Ukrainians, according to the Russian sources, they are usually conducting their counterattacks during the day when they have the best sort of capabilities to conduct, for instance, counter battery fire, to engage in sort of like these small arms fire skirmishes more effectively. And then at night, that's when the Russians usually push through and the Ukrainians are less able to push back against those attacks. And so now let's talk about the snowfall, because in the video that was released by the Wagner Group where the flag was raised over the apartment building in the city center, this one over here, there was a lot of snow, and that's pretty interesting. That's going on now in April already, and there's still a lot of snow going on. It's something that wasn't really present a few weeks ago, but recently there has been a lot of snowfall. If we look at the weather in Bakhmut, there is some precipitation projected this entire week. It's going to be at least cloudy on Tuesday, but then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, it's all precipitation. And so, yeah, you do have this issue, and it's an issue both for Russia and Ukraine, because both of them rely heavily on the logistics in order to continue their battles, obviously. The Ukrainians, they need it for resupply, evacuation, for sending in more men. And so it is very important, especially given the fact that they rely on only a few routes now. If even one of them goes down, then it could significantly decrease the amount of volume of shipments that could be moved into Bakhmut. And now that's sort of what we're seeing, because there's a lot of snow that's really clogging up a lot of the routes, such as the 506 or 504 highway, and it's bogging down the Ukrainian vehicles. And then once that melts in a few days and it mixes up with the soil, that's going to lead to mud. So you're going to have even more mud. The mud season was supposed to end already, but now we're going to see even more mud that is going to appear, and it's going to further bog down the Ukrainians, also going to bog down the Russians. That's also part of why their offensives have stopped in other areas besides Bakhmut itself. Like if we go up to the north, we were talking a lot about how the Russians would advance through this valley and take over Orikova, Vasilivka, and then advance towards Minkivka. I still think they'll do that in the long term, but again, in the short term, they can't really do that because a lot of their supply lines are getting bogged down due to this mud, and so they don't have the same sort of capabilities and momentum that they had beforehand when they were launching these attacks. So that's the general situation as of now. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys